There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome to the second episode of the Ultimate Oscars Showdown. I'm your host, Connor Old, here on this channel, where we're going to be breaking down the Best Picture winners from every decade, tier ranking them in the special tier. If you want to know more about the format, you can go to last week's episode where I explain it a little bit more, but essentially we're going to do the Best Picture, going decade by decade all the way up to the 1940s before we transition into ranking the acting award winners, so Best Actor, Actress, Supporting Actress, all throughout the summer for a bunch of decades. In the acting categories, we're going to do the 2010s all the way to the 70s, but for Best Picture, we're going to do the 2010s all the way to the 40s. Now in the second episode, still in the 21st century, the 2000s, and it was a year that I thought would actually be a little bit disappointing in terms of my tier rankings, but going back on it, I was actually surprised at how much of these movies I actually really enjoyed and how many times I thought the Oscars actually got it right. So that was a notable finding from this episode. But you guys showed a lot of support from the first episode, so continue to do that. Comment below, let me know your tier rankings, your thoughts. If you want to do the S tier, if you want to do 1 to 10, I'd love to hear that. You guys showed a lot of support for the first video. I appreciate that, and I implore you to continue because it's always greatly appreciated. But without further ado, let's jump into things. We always start off with the beginning of the decade, so starting off with the year 2000, the winner was Gladiator, and this is a kind of modern day classic and a surprise win at the time. If you remember, I think a lot of people thought Steven Soderbergh's Traffic was going to win for Best Picture because Steven Soderbergh had that and Aaron Brockovich the same year and was nominated for both those films, so he won the directing side. It had a screenplay win and an acting win as well for Benicio del Toro, and it is a situation where a surprise, I actually think, worked in this case. Sometimes we have surprises that don't always work. We'll talk about Crash a little bit later, but actually for the most part, when I was looking back on Oscar history, oftentimes surprises end up aging pretty well. I think Parasite, when that surprised and beat out 1917, I think Parasite's going to be a movie that lasts longer and is well more appreciated 50 years from now rather than 1917, which is a movie I like and it's a good movie and it will be talked about, but I think Parasite's a real special movie. And then you even go back to, say, 1972 when Godfather beat out Cabaret. Cabaret, another great film, but it's not The Godfather. And I think of this situation here where I think Gladiator has aged better than Traffic. I think it is probably a top 5 Ridley Scott movie, whereas Traffic I don't think is a top 5 Steven Soderbergh film. So in terms of the legacy of the directors and where we were at the time, Gladiator did seem like a fitting win, but it was very much a surprise not getting a directing win, not getting even a writing win. We haven't seen that very few times in the history of the Oscars where a movie wins for Best Picture and then not for directing and or writing. It happened very few times. So really a historical moment of the Oscars here, but the movie itself, I thought, is really enjoyable. It's not a movie I absolutely love the way some people absolutely love it, but I still think it's an incredible movie, super well crafted. I mean, Russell Crowe as Maximus, this is the role that he was born to play. He's perfect in it, in my sort of idealized version of the Roman general or the Roman emperor, like a Marcus Aurelius, who we see in the film, being both philosophical and physical, being respected, but also thoughtful and emotional. It's a sort of great combination that I think Ridley Scott's also able to do. He's able to take these big actions and these big action sequences in a lot of his films, but also sort of still ground that in a central, key, incredible character. I mean, think of Ellen Ripley, think of Thelma and Louise. Even if you want to go more recently to the characters in The Last Duel and how complex and varied they are, he is great at that. And the film reminiscent of those 50s and 60s epics, but also a little bit more modernized with more rapid editing and handheld camera work. So a great film overall, not one that I absolutely love, but I love rewatching it for this video. So we're going to put this one in the A tier. Okay, and then the next year, A Beautiful Mind in 2001. Another Russell Crowe film, but a film that I think works a lot less than Gladiator. It seems to me, and it always has seemed, like a movie that was almost engineered to win Oscars, whether it be the sort of weird performance quirk that allows the actor to do something different and stand out, or just sort of the typical period setting, true life story where the facts are a little bit manipulated. The twist doesn't work well on the second time once you already know it, so that sort of hurts a little bit of its rewatchability. It's a fine movie, but it's a movie you watch in math class and then don't really think about again. So A Beautiful Mind, I'm actually going to put this one in the D category. Just never been a movie for me. All right, 2002, Chicago. I actually already covered this movie in an in-depth video in my Forgotten Oscar Film series, which I did a couple years ago now, where I picked a movie that was nominated for Best Picture, and I covered one movie that I felt was forgotten amongst the five and tried to figure out why it was forgotten and my thoughts on the film, because I was watching those movies for the first time. So if you want to hear a little bit more of my thoughts, you can check out that video, but essentially, I think this is probably Rob Marshall's best film. It's a little bit forgotten just because those three main stars aren't really big stars now. They sort of have fallen off since then, but I think it's a great musical with the energy of theater kids embracing the theater kid energy and the musical energy and being over the top and grandiose. And there's certain sequences that definitely stick out in my mind, things like Cell Block Tango, but then there's other moments of the film that a little bit more forgettable. But ultimately, I think Rob Marshall did a great job adapting this play into a film, and those three stars, and Richard Gere, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Renee Zellweger, are star-making turns. Richard Gere, of course, has already been a star, but I think maybe secretly Richard Gere's best performance. They all give super great performances in the film. So I like Chicago. I think it's a solid musical, so I'm going to put that one in the B category. Then 2003, The Lord of the Rings. This is the conclusion to one of the greatest trilogies of all time, the greatest film franchise of all time, personally one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of those Oscar wins where I go back and I go, oh yeah, they got it right. And they almost got it so right. I mean, this was one of the few films that have the most Oscar wins of all time, winning 11 awards for its 11 nominations. It won in every category. It was a complete clean sweep, something that I don't think we're going to see in the Oscars ever again, even for a movie like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It'd be crazy to think that a movie nowadays would win 11 Oscars, but Lord of the Rings did. And when you think about these franchises, Star Wars, Marvel movies, Harry Potter, none of them have won Best Picture. So it's kind of crazy to see that, oh, well, actually, The Lord of the Rings, it did win Best Picture. It was a little bit more elevated. Of course, Star Wars almost won Best Picture in 1977. Harry Potter never had a chance. Same thing with the Marvel movies. But I do think, when looking back on it, this was a critical moment of the Oscars. It was a critical moment of sort of early 2000s culture, and the Lord of the Rings movies still hold up really well. They're still incredible. This third film being the emotional climax of the film, so you get these great sequences of You Bow to No Man, or the sequence between Sam and Frodo as Sam is carrying up the mountain, or even just the sort of great battle sequences of Gondor and Grond, and all these rich, interesting characters, the conclusion to the journey, so emotionally satisfying because of what we've come through. I don't know if it works as a movie on itself, but you know what, that doesn't matter. When you watch The Lord of the Rings, you watch the trilogy, you watch the extended cuts, and it works so well. And really, I think is an all-time classic, so without a doubt, in my mind, has to go into the S tier, all-time, one of the best Picture winners of all time. $1 Million Baby here for 2004, and overall this was kind of a forgettable year for me. I thought, okay, maybe $1 Million Baby, it's a movie I've seen. I haven't seen it in a long time, so it's not super memorable to me. Then when I rewatched it, I realized I'd forgotten a lot of it except for that ending. And then I went, okay, well, what would I have given the Best Picture to? And I look at the other nominees, and they're all sort of middling too. I mean, Aviator's not Scorsese's best, it's solid. Ray is solid too, but I don't think it's Taylor Hackford's best, and it's kind of a little bit parodied and is sort of the main criticized film in like a spoof movie like Walk Hard, so it's kind of hard to watch Walk Hard and then go back to watch Ray because you see some of those now comedic moments in a serious film. Then you have Sideways, which is a well-liked movie, and I like it, although it is sort of an era of early 2000s pre-drinking and driving wine culture, but still a solid Alexander Payne film. And then Finding Neverland is a movie rarely mentioned even by Johnny Depp fans. So really weird year, a bit of a forgettable year, because at least for me, when I think of Clint Eastwood, I think of, oh, his Oscar, yeah, that was Unforgiven, right? That was his sort of big ceremony, right? All these directors usually have one or two big ceremonies. Spielberg, that was Schindler's List. Scorsese, that was The Departed, which we'll talk about. But Clint Eastwood, I thought, was Unforgiven, but then it was also $1 Million Baby here. So a little bit of a weird year. I think that ending is really impactful and strong, but some of the more in-between moments are a little bit more generic boxing movie stuff. Not one of my favorite Clint Eastwoods personally. I'm sort of a little bit more partial to the 90s, mid to late 90s Clint Eastwood periods with stuff like Bird and Bridges of Madison County and Unforgiven, and even In the Line of Fire, which he didn't direct, but he's great. And that's probably my preferred Clint versus this later period Clint, before it actually gets into late period Clint. So I like the movie, but I don't absolutely love it, and it's a little bit forgettable for me, so I'm going to nestle that one in the C tier. Then Crash, one of the most divisive, if not the most divisive, Best Picture winner of all time, and it's not even divisive in many ways because I think just its general reputation is that it's not good. I covered this film as well on Forgotten Oscar films in the past, but it just reeks of the Academy wanting to feel progressive and liberal and ahead of the times, but then in doing so, in voting for Crash, they're denying and revealing their internal homophobia by not rewarding Brokeback Mountain, which they gave Best Director to. So that is a movie that, you know, you just look at it and you sort of cringe and you wince and you go, oof, I think even modern day Oscar members probably would go back and give it to Brokeback Mountain, because they already gave, you know, Best Director to Ang Lee. They liked the film, but for some reason they wanted to go with Crash here. And it's just a movie that doesn't age totally well in terms of its politics and social issues, and it's very manipulative in that sense. It's not a movie that's the worst movie of all time. I think a lot of people think of that as like, oh my god, this is terrible, you know, half star, 1 star maybe. It's a fine movie. It's effective at trying to provoke you, and I think that's notable for its filmmaking, and the performances are all good. It's just you know, not a film that's aged super well, and I don't think it's going to be looked highly upon in future generations, so I'm going to have to put this one in the D category. The Departed, 2006. This is Martin Scorsese's big crowning achievement, the big time where he won Best Director and Best Picture, although I don't even know if it's a top 10 Martin Scorsese film for me. Now that's saying something, because I love Scorsese. He's one of, if not my favorite filmmaker of all time. And rewatching this for this episode, you realize just how crazy and chaotic the film is. I mean, Scorsese's really doing a lot of things stylistically and trying to bend the genre and using the same song over and over again, but then stopping it halfway and then distorting it and then stopping mid-scene. It does feel like this sort of crazy jump all over the place story, and some of the stylistic and formal stuff doesn't totally work for me, but I still enjoy the movie. I think it's got two amazing performances at the center, with Matt Damon being that sort of slimy skis ball that we don't always see him do, but he's so good at. And then Leo, this was sort of his first role, in my mind at least, that transformed him from being the Titanic lover boy to being one of our great leading actors. It starts here in some of this more nervy energy that he has. It is great in here. It's maybe one of his best performances. So you have these two great performances. Mark Wahlberg is great. There are some funny moments and lines. I don't know what Jack Nicholson is doing in the film. He's doing crazy stuff, but he's still got some menacing parts as well. So it's still a movie I really enjoy, even if I don't totally appreciate some of the length or some of the scenes that I feel like you can cut out, like the opening, which feels like it's a different movie. It feels very much like a genre exercise, but maybe not Xing out some of the stuff that some of the poor made genre films do. But regardless, it's still a fun film that I enjoy, and it's Martin Scorsese, so that alone has got to put it in the B tier. 2007, No Country for Old Men, and 2007 is one of the great years for movies, particularly within the 21st century, I think, because when you look at the Best Picture lineup, it was a great year. So that's how you know. If you know the Best Picture lineup is great, then you know there's even more great films aside from that that could have gotten nominated for Best Picture too. So you look at Best Picture, it was a combination between the battle, No Country for Old Men versus There Will Be Blood. Two of our great premier filmmakers in the Coen brothers and Paul Thomas Anderson, some of my personal favorites, going head to head in two masterpieces. And then you got Michael Clayton, which I also think is a secret masterpiece as well, a great Men in Suits movie. Then also nominated Atonement, which is a great literary adaptation. Juno, an iconic teen movie of the likes of Superbad in terms of the teen movies of the 21st century. And then all the movies that weren't nominated: Assassination of Jesse James, Ratatouille, Zodiac, Eastern Promises. There's just so many great films from that year that you can have a whole video dedicated to it. But despite that, I actually think No Country for Old Men is still the best movie. I think that it is a critical film within the Coen brothers filmography, because they've always been known for their eccentricities, their writing, the sort of weird, quirky stuff that they do. But in the two films previous to this, Intolerable Cruelty and The Lady Killers, I felt that the eccentricities and the weirdness went a little bit too far, and I think it lost a few people. So people post Fargo, post Big Lebowski, post Oh Brother, they are going like, okay, Coen's are a little bit of a slump. So what do? They adapt this bare bones Cormac McCarthy novel and they make it even more bare bones. No score, very little dialogue. It's just a testament to how great filmmakers they are, because they don't even need to rely on their eccentricities. They like to do it. It's fun in Hail Caesars and Big Lebowski's, but when they take that away, they can make a really tight, visually inventive thriller, and that's the demonstration here, that they understand the film form so well that they don't even need to rely on what they're known for to still make an interesting, thrilling thriller. And it really is the patience of the film, the quietness of the film, that increases that eeriness and that sense of dread and that sense of contemplation through Tommy Lee Jones' character, or that sense of dread between Josh Brolin and Javier Bardem and their lineage there. And Javier Bardem giving one of the best screen performances, I think, of all time as Antar Chigurh, just the embodiment of evil, just the way the Coens direct their actors, the careful movements, the slow sort of deliberate pacing of the film and its camera movements. It's a masterclass in filmmaking. It's one of those films that if you want to just learn the basics of filmmaking and how to tell a story visually, it's a movie you have to watch. So without a doubt, an all-time classic for me, S-tier stuff on there with The Lord of the Rings. 2008 Slumdog Millionaire. This movie is in the same vein of other Oscar winners like The King's Speech, The Artist, and Coda for me. All movies which I enjoy, which are enjoyable, but never movies that I think about too often that I rewatched a lot. But despite that, I actually think this is maybe the best directed film of the bunch, with Danny Boyle, who does a lot of formal and interesting things stylistically with the film, whether it be modern day pop songs or that great score that's underneath, or even just sort of his typical rapid, fast-paced handheld camera stuff that he had employed all the way back in '96 with Trainspotting. And yet the best part of the film, I think, is actually the screenplay by Simon Beaufoy, in which we actually get to see Jamal tell his story through the questions, and that the questions that lead up to that final $1 million question. We get to see how he's able to understand those answers and where in his life took him and the journey that he had growing up. And then, of course, leading up into that final question, and will he know it or will he not know it, and will we see something in a flashback that will help him understand the question? Just great classic Hollywood storytelling. It is a weird kind of an Oscar win historically, because it does seem like this period from like 2006, 2009, 2010, with movies like Eat, Pray, Love and Rachel Getting Married, there was a sort of American obsession with Indian culture for this small period, and it feels like this sort of captured that in many ways. But that being said, still looking at it from a 2023 viewpoint, it's still an engaging movie, an exciting movie. Dev Patel is great in it, and it's a really enjoyable movie, if not a movie that I think about in terms of its complex themes or its characters, or that I rewatch trying to figure out new things about it. But you watch it once, twice, you enjoy it, you have a good feel-good moment, some tense moments as well. Solid movie overall. So I'm going to end that one up in the B tier. And then finally, 2009, we have The Hurt Locker, which was the big Catherine Bigelow versus her ex-husband James Cameron Avatar, the big movie of the year versus Hurt Locker, the Best Picture winner that made no money at the box office. David versus Goliath, I think that was sort of the narrative of the year. But it was also a great year because they expanded this to 10 years, so we got great movies like Up and Up in the Air, and movies that probably wouldn't have gotten nominated in years past did in this expanded lineup. So that was a great evolution for the Oscars. But in terms of the film itself, I hadn't rewatched it in a long time, except for when I decided to prepare for this video. And initial thoughts, I was thinking, oh yeah, it's a good movie, solid movie, B tier, A tier. I'd always remember the grocery store scene. But when I rewatched it, I was just amazed at how well understood and crafted the film was. I think Catherine Bigelow, despite being a woman, I think has a deep understanding of masculinity. And I think because she's a woman, she's able to understand those differences between not necessarily men and women, but just masculine features and feminine features through, of course, this story about war. And there's some moments that are political through metaphor, but for the most part, it's just about a character study, about a man who is obsessed with war. We understand that through sort of the first quote and the sequences of the film. But just even the amazing opening sequence in which we get Guy Pearce, who dies in that opening scene, is incredibly impactful because he's clearly a main actor that we thought we knew, we think is going to be somewhat part of the film later on, and then to kill him off so early on, what does that do? It tells us immediately that this is a dangerous job, that we should be aware of it. So then in the next scene, when we introduce Jeremy Renner, and he's this cowboy, and he's this sort of live wire guy who's not going to follow the rules, we immediately feel tense like Anthony Mackie's character or some of the other soldiers, because we just saw the consequences of that first scene, how serious and dangerous this is. So when we see the next scene and it's, happy-go-lucky, we know the tension and the terror. It just adds to so much of that tension of the film. And then as it evolves along and the protagonists don't necessarily know why they're here, and that being a representation of the Iraq War. But then, of course, when we get to, I think, maybe the best scene in cinema history, which is that grocery store scene. It's incredible because it's a scene that can only work within the structure of the film. When you think of your favorite scenes of all time, most of them you can watch on YouTube and show it to someone who's never seen the film before, and they'd go, oh yeah, that's a really good scene, that's a great scene, I should check out the movie. It's almost a selling point for the film. But when you think of this scene, it's a perfect scene for film because it couldn't be a great photograph, because it couldn't even be just a great YouTube clip, because you have to have the understanding of the 2 hours before that. This is a scene that's placed right at the end of the film that gives you 2 hours of context of what these guys been through, of how the camera is constantly moving around and shooting. So when we get this very still camera, when we get this long takes kind of situation within the grocery store scene, it just intensely and clearly, so clearly visually representing to you the theme of the film, that guy is broken in a way and he's meant to be over in war, and the domestic life is just not for him. And it's tragic and it's understandable, but it's heartbreaking, but also kind of feels like that's where he's supposed to be too. And you just do it through that sort of singular frame of him, small in the frame, in the grocery store aisle or in his house, where he's just a small part of the frame, and we see this giant widescreen lens of all the grocery cereal brands, and he seems so small and he seems so significant, and it's just this perfect moment in film because of the thematic understanding that's conveyed through one single image, one single scene, the differences between how it's shot, and because that scene couldn't work as a YouTube clip without your acknowledgement and understanding of what has come before it, it has to be within a film. And that's why it's such a great, one of my favorite all-time film sequences and scenes of all time. So regardless of everything, that grocery store scene gives it an S tier alone, but there's so much other great stuff, intense moments throughout the film. It could use a little bit of trimming, but still terrific film overall. So personally, I was surprised that I actually gave out 3 S tiers, but this decade was filled with some great films, absolutely. So there's the list right now. Take a look at it, take it in. Comment below your ranking, see if it's any different. Let me know if I'm crazy about certain movies. Are you a big Chicago fan? Do you think Lord of the Rings is maybe overrated? All that kind of fun stuff. I'd love to hear in the comments below. And stay tuned to next week, where I'm going to give my ranking on the 90s Best Picture winners. So you have some great classics like maybe Unforgiven, but then some more forgettable ones like The English Patient, or some grand ones like Titanic. Lots of stuff there going to be talking about. So it should be a fun video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.